Hey everyone, tonight we're drifting back, way back, to the quiet corners of human curiosity where someone, somewhere, first noticed a particular plant curling its leaves toward the sun and thought, I wonder what happens if I breathe its smoke. Settle in now, pull the blanket a little higher, let your shoulders soften against the pillow. Dim the lights if they're still bright. We're going to move very slowly through thousands of years. Not rushing, not chasing any dramatic revelations, just floating alongside the gentle, persistent way cannabis has traveled with people across continents and centuries. Breathe and hold for a moment, breathe out. Let the words be like warm smoke rising lazily from a small fire on a calm evening. No hurry, no need to remember anything. Just listen and let your mind wander beside the story. Imagine the very earliest moments we can trace, not with written records yet, those come much later, but with the silent testimony of seeds and charred residue that archaeologists have found in places that once felt the footsteps of people who lived 5,000 years ago or more. Around 2500 BCE, in what is now Romania, in a place called Teliac, someone left behind a small ceramic vessel. Inside it, when modern science looked very closely, were traces of cannabis pollen and charred plant material. Not just any cannabis, enough to suggest it had been burned, perhaps as incense in a ritual, perhaps inhaled during a long night of storytelling or healing. We don't know the name of the person who lit that fire. We don't know if they smiled when the smoke first curled into their lungs, or if their eyes grew heavy and peaceful. But the residue is there, quiet and patient, waiting thousands of years to tell us. Someone, long before cities had names, already knew this plant could change the air inside a room and inside a mind. Let's float a little further east, because the trail warms as we move toward the high steppe lands and river valleys where early pastoral people wandered with their herds. In the Darien Basin, what is now Xinjiang, China, archaeologists opened tombs sealed around 2500 to 2000 BCE. Inside wooden coffins, under felt blankets, lay bodies dressed in finely woven wool. Beside them, leather pouches, wooden bowls, and small braziers. In those braziers, and in wooden containers nearby, lay cannabis, stems, leaves, fruits, charred at the edges. The seeds were still viable enough that scientists could study their DNA. The THC content was modest compared to modern varieties, but it was there, enough to matter. The people buried in these graves belonged to a culture we call the Xiaoa. They were tall, fair-haired, spoke an ancient Indo-European language, herded sheep and cattle across high pastures. They left no writing, but they left these quiet offerings of smoke. Perhaps the cannabis was burned to honor the dead, to carry prayers upward on fragrant air. Perhaps a shaman inhaled deeply before entering trance, guiding souls safely to the next world. Or perhaps, on cold steppe nights when the wind never stopped, a few people simply passed a small clay pipe among themselves, watching the stars grow brighter and the worries of the day grow softer. Drift with me now to the opposite direction, westward, across mountains and deserts, to the ancient land we call Scythia. Around 440 BCE, a Greek traveler named Herodotus sat in a tent somewhere north of the Black Sea and watched something that fascinated him enough to write it down. He described the funeral rites of the Scythians, nomadic horse people who roamed the vast grasslands from modern Ukraine to Kazakhstan. After burying their dead, he said, the mourners would crawl inside a small tent made of felt. In the center stood a bronze cauldron filled with red-hot stones. Onto those stones they threw hemp seeds, cannabis seeds. The seeds hissed and smoked. The tent filled with thick, fragrant vapor. Herodotus wrote, the Scythians howl in their joy at the vapor bath. They inhaled deeply, he said, and it made them shriek with pleasure. Now, Herodotus was Greek. He was used to wine and symposiums. To him, this looked like intoxication. Modern archaeologists have found exactly what he described. Small bronze cauldrons and Scythian kurgans, burial mounds, some still containing hemp seeds and residues high enough in THC to produce noticeable effects. Wooden frames for tiny tents, gold plaques showing figures inhaling from these vessels. The Scythians didn't just burn cannabis. They engineered a way to concentrate the smoke, to make the experience stronger, more enveloping. Let the image rest gently. A circle of riders, wind-burned faces softened by firelight, a small felt tent glowing from within, sweet herbal smoke drifting out through the seams, laughter and low song rising into the endless night sky. No rush, no judgment, just people long ago finding a plant that made the world feel a little kinder for a while. Now ease further along the timeline, into the settled river civilizations where writing begins to appear. In ancient India, around 1500 to 1000 BCE, the people who composed the Vedas, the oldest sacred texts of Hinduism, spoke of a plant called bhang or vijaya. One hymn in the Atharva Veda calls it one of 5 sacred plants that relieve anxiety. They describe it as a source of happiness, a liberator, something that takes away fear. Bhang was prepared as a drink. Ground cannabis leaves, milk, ghee, spices, offered to Shiva, the god of destruction and transformation, the god who dances in cremation grounds and smears ash on his body. Yogis and ascetics used it to still the mind during meditation. Kings and poets wrote about it. The plant was not hidden or taboo. It was revered. Temples had bhang stands during festivals. Even today in India, during Holi or Mahashivaratri, some people still drink bhang lassi under the moon, the same recipe passed down for 3,000 years or more. Flowed across the mountains now to ancient China. The pharmacologist and Emperor Shun Nung, legendary figure, said to have lived around 2700 BCE, wrote in the earliest known Chinese materia medica that hemp/cannabis, was good for removing wind, relieving stiffness, regulating menses. Female plants were noted as especially medicinal. The seeds were food. The fibers made rope, cloth, paper. But the flowers and leaves were used as medicine for malaria, rheumatism, absent-mindedness. Later texts from the Han Dynasty, 200 BCE, 200 CE, describe physicians prescribing cannabis for forgetfulness and restlessness. Taoist alchemists experimented with it, seeking immortality or at least a longer, clearer life. They burned it, drank it, sometimes mixed it with other herbs to deepen meditation or quiet the chatter of the mind. Let's linger here a moment on that phrase, forgetfulness, not as a warning, but as a benefit. In a world of constant labor, war, loss, the ability to forget for a while must have felt like mercy. The plant was not demonized. It was cataloged, valued, used carefully. Drift westward again, along the Silk Road this time. Cannabis traveled with traders, nomads, armies. By the time of the Islamic Golden Age, 8th to 13th century CE, Arabic physicians like Al-Razi and Ibn Sina, Avicenna, were writing about hashish, the concentrated resin, in their medical encyclopedias. They described it as cooling, drying, good for headaches, for melancholy, for insomnia. They warned about overuse, of course. Too much could bring lethargy, confusion, but they did not ban it. Sufi mystics in Persia and Central Asia used it to heighten spiritual awareness, to dissolve the ego for a few hours and feel closer to the divine. Stories of hashish eaters spread, some humorous, some cautionary, like the tales in the 1001 Nights where a man under the influence imagines himself a king or a beggar. The plant was part of the pharmacopoeia, part of poetry, part of quiet evenings in gardens where fountains played and poets recited verses about love and the moon. And all this time, in the background, cannabis was also just useful. Hemp fiber made the strongest ropes for sailing ships, the most durable canvas for sails, the toughest paper for scrolls and later books. The plant fed people. The seeds are rich in protein and oil, clothed them, sheltered them. Hempcrete, an ancient mixture of hemp hurd and lime, was used in some regions for insulation. It was never only about smoke. It was about survival, comfort, medicine, ritual, and sometimes simple pleasure. Let's pause here, in the soft glow of all these centuries. The plant has already traveled so far, steppe to river valley, tent to temple, campfire to manuscript. No one yet called it weed or marijuana. No laws had tried to erase it. It simply existed, growing where people carried its seeds, offering whatever it had to offer to whoever paused long enough to notice. We'll keep drifting onward soon. Rest your eyes if they're growing heavy. There's no need to hold on to anything. Just let the story carry you. And so the smoke from those ancient braziers in the Narration basin and the felt tents of the Scythians kept rising, carried on winds that didn't care about borders or calendars. Let's stay right here with that drifting scent for a while longer, breathing slowly, letting your body sink a little deeper into the mattress. No need to hold any detail too tightly. Just allow the story to continue floating forward, century by gentle century, like incense curling through an open window on a still summer evening. And hold softly out. Good. We're in no hurry at all. By the time we reach the early centuries of the Common Era, cannabis had already become a quiet, familiar companion across much of the known world. In the Eastern Mediterranean, where Greek and Roman influence met older Persian and Indian traditions, physicians began to write more systematically about it. Galen, the great Roman doctor of the 2nd century CE, mentions cannabis several times in his works. He describes the seeds as nourishing and the leaves as useful for ear pain when juiced and dropped warm into the canal. He notes that the plant produces a warm and dry effect and can ease inflammation. Galen was careful, clinical. He wasn't rhapsodizing about visions or laughter, but he clearly knew people were using more than just the seeds and fiber. In the same era, the Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder, in his massive natural history, circa 77 C, lists cannabis among plants that relax the body and help with stiffness and pain. He describes how the juice of the leaves, when applied, soothes inflammation of the joints. Pliny also mentions that the Scythians still use it to produce exhilaration, though he frames it as something foreign, almost exotic. To a Roman patrician, the idea of inhaling smoke in a tent might have sounded primitive. Yet the plant itself was already growing in Roman gardens, cultivated for rope and cloth. Its medicinal uses quietly noted in scrolls kept in villa libraries. Let that image rest easy. A Roman physician in a white tunic, standing in a sunlit peristyle garden, crushing a few fresh cannabis leaves between his fingers, smelling the sharp green resin, then writing a careful prescription on papyrus for a patient with chronic joint pain. No drama, just another herb among many. Mandrake, henbane, opium poppy, each with its place in the long list of things nature provides for those who suffer. Drift now with the trade routes that carried more than silk and spices. Along the Red Sea, across the Indian Ocean, Arab dhows sailed with holds full of incense, myrrh, and cannabis resin. By the 7th to 8th century CE, during the rapid expansion of Islam, hashish, the concentrated resin, often pressed into blocks, appears in Arabic medical texts with increasing frequency. Al-Razi, Razes, writing in Baghdad around 900 CE, describes hashish as having hot and dry properties in the 2nd degree. He recommends small doses for melancholy, for headaches, for insomnia. He cautions that excessive use leads to confusion of intellect and dryness of the brain, but he does not condemn it outright. It is medicine, not poison. Ibn Sina, Avicenna, the Persian polymath whose canon of medicine became the standard textbook for centuries, echoes this. In the section on simples, single herbs, He notes that cannabis produces exhilaration and intoxication. When taken in quantity, relaxes the body, and can be useful for asthma and pain. He too warns of overuse, flatulence, impotence, mental confusion. But again, moderation is the key, not prohibition. In the Sufi circles of Persia and Central Asia, during these same centuries, cannabis took on a deeper, quieter role. Some orders used it ritually to help dissolve the ego, to reach states of fana, annihilation in the divine. Small amounts were eaten or smoked before long sessions of dhikr, repetitive chanting of the names of God, until the mind softened and the heart opened. Stories circulated of saints who could enter deep contemplation with the help of a single piece of hashish the size of a pea. These were not wild bacchanals. They were disciplined, inward journeys. The plant was a tool, like fasting or night vigils, for those seeking closeness to the beloved. Poetry from the era sometimes veiled these experiences in metaphor. Wine standing in for hashish, the tavern for the Sufi gathering, so that orthodox critics would not take offense. Yet the practice persisted in certain zawiyas, Sufi lodges, passed from teacher to student like a whispered secret. Let's pause and breathe here for a moment. Feel the slow rise and fall of your chest. Imagine a small clay pipe, warm from the ember, being passed hand to hand in a dimly lit room in 10th century Isfahan. Low voices chanting softly, eyes half closed, no one speaking loudly, no one rushing, just the gentle expansion of time, the way a single breath can stretch longer than it has any right to. Meanwhile, in India, the use of bhang continued to deepen and spread. By the medieval period, roughly 1000 to 1500 CE, Ayurvedic texts like the Sushruta Samhita and later works classify cannabis as Vijaya, victory, a plant that conquers disease and anxiety. Physicians prescribe bhang drinks for digestive issues, insomnia, appetite loss, even as an aphrodisiac in small doses. During festivals, Holi, Diwali, Mahashivaratri, bhang is openly prepared in temples and homes. The drink is mixed with milk, almonds, cardamom, black pepper, rose petals, and sometimes a touch of opium or dachira for extra potency. Devotees offer it to Shiva lingams, then drink it themselves, believing it brings them closer to the god's ecstatic, meditative state. Sadhus and fakirs smear ash on their bodies, sit cross-legged under banyan trees, and consume bhang to help maintain long periods of stillness and contemplation. Children are kept away, of course. This is adult medicine, adult sacrament. Across the Himalayas in Tibet, cannabis appears in traditional medicine as well. Tibetan texts from the 8th to 12th centuries mention soma, a term sometimes linked to cannabis or other psychoactive plants, as part of tantric rituals. Monks and yogis used it sparingly to deepen meditation, to hold awareness during dream yoga or tummo, inner heat, practices. The plant was never central, more an occasional ally, but it was known, respected, used with great care. Now let's float gently into the Islamic world again, because something interesting begins to happen around the 12th to 13th centuries. As hashish use spreads from Sufi circles into urban life, coffee houses, bathhouses, private gardens, moral debates emerge. Some religious scholars condemn it as an intoxicant like wine, forbidden by the Quran. Others argue it is medicinal and permissible in moderation. Fatwas are issued both ways. Stories multiply. The hashish eater who imagines himself caliph for a night, the poet who writes ecstatic verse under its influence, the physician who prescribes it for melancholy. In Cairo, Damascus, Baghdad, small shops sell hashish confections, majun, mixed with honey, nuts, spices. People eat them discreetly or smoke the pure resin in long pipes. The practice is neither universal nor hidden. It exists in a gray space between medicine pleasure, and sacrament. Let that gray space feel soft around you. No sharp edges, no villains or heroes, just people in different centuries, in different rooms, breathing the same plant and finding whatever peace or insight it offers them. As we move into the late medieval period, cannabis begins to appear in European herbals as well, mostly as hemp, but with occasional nods to its other uses. In 1542, the German botanist Leon Hartfuchs includes a detailed woodcut of cannabis in his New Herbal. He describes the plant's fiber, seeds, and medicinal virtues, echoing Galen. Good for earache, jaundice, hard swellings. He makes no mention of smoke or intoxication, perhaps because Europeans were not yet inhaling it in any widespread way. That would come later, carried on other winds. For now, let the centuries keep unfolding slowly, like pages turned by an unseen hand. The plant has already circled much of the Old World. It has been medicine, fiber, food, incense, sacrament, companion on cold nights and long meditations. No laws have yet tried to erase it. No empire has declared war on it. It simply grows where people plant it, offers what it has, and waits. Rest your eyes if they want to close. Let your breathing slow even more. We'll continue drifting in just a moment. There's still so much quiet history left to share. And so the quiet gray space of those medieval gardens and Sufi lodges lingers in the air like the last breath of incense before it fades completely. Let's stay right here for a while longer, breathing in time with the slow turning of the centuries. Your body is heavy now against the mattress, isn't it? Shoulders soft, jaw loose, eyelids growing heavier with each slow exhale. No need to fight it. No need to hold any single fact. Just let the story keep drifting forward, gentle as moonlight moving across a still pond. And soft hold out. Good. We're moving into the age when the plant begins to cross oceans in new ways, carried not just by traders and mystics, but by sailors, colonists, slaves, and eventually by ordinary people who simply wanted to feel a little less of the weight of the world. By the 15th and 16th centuries, cannabis was already growing in North Africa, the Middle East, and much of South Asia as both medicine and mild intoxicant. In Morocco and Egypt, kif, a mixture of cannabis and local tobacco, was smoked in long sebsai pipes, small clay bowls on reed stems, in cafes and private homes. Travelers' accounts from the period describe men, and sometimes women, gathering in shaded courtyards after sunset, passing the pipe, speaking in low voices until laughter came easily and time seemed to stretch. The Ottoman Empire, at its height, tolerated hashish in many regions, even as some sultans issued occasional edicts against it. In Cairo's coffee houses, new social institutions that had spread from Yemen, hashish confections were sometimes offered alongside the bitter black brew. A few sips of coffee, a small piece of majun, and the night could unfold in pleasant, unhurried conversation. European travelers, merchants, diplomats, pilgrims, wrote home about these customs with a mixture of fascination and disapproval. They called it the Indian drug, or the herb of forgetfulness. Some tried it themselves, usually in secret, and returned to Venice or Lisbon with stories they told only to close friends. Let that image settle softly. A 16th century coffee house in Cairo or Istanbul. Low divans along the walls, brass trays holding tiny cups of thick coffee, a faint haze of smoke curling upward from shared pipe. Men in turbans and long robes leaning back, eyes half-lidded, one of them reciting poetry in a low, melodic voice while the others nod slowly, letting the words wash over them like warm water. No loud music, no rush, just the gentle creak of the pipe stem being passed, the soft clink of a spoon against porcelain, the distant call to prayer echoing from a minaret. Now drift with the trade winds across the Atlantic. When Christopher Columbus sailed in 1492, he wasn't carrying cannabis seeds on purpose, but hemp was already a standard shipboard crop in Europe, grown for rope and canvas. Every ocean-going vessel needed vast quantities of hemp rigging. A single large ship could require miles of rope. Spanish and Portuguese explorers brought hemp seeds to the Caribbean and South America almost immediately. By the early 1500s, hemp plantations were established in Mexico, Chile, and Peru. The Spanish crown ordered colonists to grow it. It was considered a strategic resource. The plant adapted quickly to tropical and subtropical soils. While the main purpose was fiber, local people, indigenous groups, and later enslaved Africans soon noticed the flowering tops. In Mexico, cannabis became known as marijuana, possibly from the Nahuatl Malahuan, meaning prisoner, or from other indigenous words for intoxicating plant. By the 17th century, reports from New Spain describe indigenous people and mestizos smoking or eating the leaves and resin for pain, fatigue, and pleasure. It blended with existing traditions, peyote, pulque, tobacco, and quietly became part of folk medicine and occasional recreation. In Brazil, Portuguese colonists planted hemp for sails and ropes, but enslaved Africans brought their own knowledge of the plant from West Africa, where it had long been used. In the sugar plantations of Bahia and Pernambuco, cannabis grew wild in the margins and was gathered for smoking in pipes made of corn cobs or reeds. The practice was called fumar makanha, a term whose origins are debated, possibly from Kimbundu or other Banda languages. Enslaved people used it to dull the pain of labor, to quiet the mind during long nights, to create small pockets of joy in a brutal world. Plantation owners sometimes tolerated it. It kept workers calmer, and sometimes punished it severely. Yet spread. By the 18th century, makanha was part of the cultural fabric in many Afro-Brazilian communities, woven into candomblé ceremonies and capoeira circles. Let's breathe here again. Feel the slow rise of your chest. Imagine a quiet night in 17th century Bahia, a small fire outside a row of slave cabins, a group sitting in a loose circle, passing a simple pipe made from a hollowed gourd. Low singing in Yoruba or Banta dialects, laughter soft and careful so as not to wake the overseer. The smoke rises, carrying a little relief, a little forgetting, into the starry southern sky. Meanwhile, back in Europe, cannabis remained mostly industrial and medicinal. Hemp fields covered large areas of France, Italy, Spain, and England, used for sails, paper, clothing. Queen Elizabeth I reportedly fined farmers who did not grow enough hemp. Yet recreational smoking was rare. Europeans preferred alcohol, wine, beer, gin, and tobacco, which arrived from the Americas in the late 16th century and quickly became fashionable. Cannabis smoke did not catch on in the same way. A few alchemists and physicians experimented. Paracelsus in the 16th century mentions hemp in his writings, but it stayed on the margins. That changes slightly in the 19th century. In 1839, an Irish physician named William Brooke O'Shaughnessy publishes a groundbreaking paper in the Journal of the Irish Academy of Medicine. He had spent years in India studying local medical practices and returned to Europe with cannabis tinctures and extracts. He describes using them successfully to treat tetanus, rabies, epilepsy, rheumatism, cholera, and even infant convulsions. His work sparks interest across the medical world. By the 1840s, 1850s, cannabis tincture, often called Indian hemp extract, is sold in pharmacies in Britain, France, the United States, and elsewhere. It is prescribed for migraine, insomnia, menstrual cramps, neuralgia, and as a sedative. Queen Victoria is said to have been given cannabis tincture for menstrual pain, though evidence is anecdotal. The American Pharmacopoeia lists it as a standard remedy from 1850 until 1942. Patients took it in drops under the tongue or mixed in water. It was not smoked. Western medicine preferred the more controlled dosing of tinctures, but the plant's reputation as a relaxant and pain reliever spread among the educated classes. At the same time, recreational use begins to appear in small pockets. In France, the Club de Hashichins, Hashish Eaters Club, forms in Paris around 1844 to 1849. Writers, artists, and intellectuals, Théophile Gautier, Charles Baudelaire, Alexandre Dumas, Dr. Jacques-Joseph Moreau, gather in a rented room of the Hotel Pomodan on the Isle St. Louis. They take hashish paste dissolved in coffee or in a sweet paste called dalmasque. Moreau, a psychiatrist, documents the effects meticulously, later publishing Hashish and Mental Illness. Baudelaire writes poetic essays about the artificial paradise it creates, euphoria, heightened senses, time dilation, sometimes paranoia. Gautier describes visions of impossible colors and landscapes. Dumas includes hashish scenes in the Count of Monte Cristo. These were not everyday users. They were curious, literary men experimenting in a controlled setting. The club lasted only a few years, but it left a lasting mark on European literature and the romantic imagination. Let that scene rest gently. A candlelit room in mid-19th century Paris, velvet cushions, low tables, men in frock coats reclining, eyes distant, one of them murmuring verses about the infinite while another smiles slowly at the patterns the wallpaper seems to be making. No loud revelry, just quiet wonder, the soft clink of a spoon in a coffee cup, the faint sweet smell hanging in the air. Across the Atlantic, cannabis arrives with Mexican immigrants in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. In the border regions of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California, migrant workers bring marijuana cigarettes, rolled in corn husks or thin paper. They smoke them after long days in the fields or on the railroad. The word marijuana enters American English through this route. At first, it is a regional curiosity, used mostly by Mexican laborers, some black jazz musicians in New Orleans, a few dock workers in New York. It is not yet widespread or feared. Pharmacies still sell cannabis tinctures over the counter. Cigarettes are sold discreetly in some cities. The plant is simply there, part of the immigrant patchwork, offering a few moments of ease after exhausting labor. Let your breathing slow, even more now. Feel how heavy your limbs have become. The story is still moving, but you don't need to follow every turn. Just let it wash over you like distant music. We'll keep drifting forward in a moment, into the 20th century, where everything begins to change. But for now, rest. The green haze is still gentle. There's no rush at all. And so the soft haze of those Paris salons and the quiet courtyards of Cairo lingers for just a moment longer, like the last note of a slow melody before the room falls completely silent. Let it stay there, drifting, while your breathing continues to slow in soft and easy out, letting every exhale carry a little more weight away from your body. Your arms are heavy now, your legs sunk deep into the bed, your mind already half dissolved into the pillow. There's nothing left to do, nowhere left to go. Just listen. Let the final stretch of the story carry you the rest of the way into sleep. We left the plant in the late 19th and very early 20th centuries, still mostly medicine in the West, still sacrament and small comfort in the East and South, still quietly growing in the margins of fields and backyards from Mexico to Brazil to Morocco. No one yet feared it on a grand scale. Pharmacies in New York, London, Paris kept cannabis tincture on open shelves next to laudanum and cocaine preparations. Labels read extract of cannabis indica or fluid extract of hemp, with dosage instructions printed neatly underneath. Doctors wrote prescriptions for nervous exhaustion, insomnia, hysteria, menstrual cramps, migraine, even opium withdrawal. Patients, often middle-class women and overworked men, took a few drops in water before bed, and woke feeling rested. The edges of the day softened. No headlines screamed danger. No laws had yet tried to erase the plant from existence. But the world was changing, faster than anyone could quite follow. The 20th century arrived with new machines, new borders, new fears. In the United States, especially, a strange alchemy began to take place. Mexican immigration increased sharply after the 1910 revolution. Families crossing into Texas, Arizona, California, New Mexico, looking for work in railroads, farms, mines. They brought with them a habit that had existed quietly for generations south of the border: smoking marijuana cigarettes, often hand-rolled in corn husks or thin paper. The word marijuana, sometimes spelled marijuana or marijuana, entered English-language newspapers in the American Southwest around 1910 to 1915. At first, the articles were neutral or curious, local color pieces about the Mexican cigarette or the Indian drug. But tone shifted quickly. By the mid-1910s, yellow journalism and nativist panic began to link marijuana with crime, violence, and racial difference. Let that shift settle gently, without tension. No villains here, just ordinary human fear dressed up in headlines. In 1914, El Paso passes the first city ordinance banning marijuana possession. Other Texas towns follow. California enacts a state law in 1915. By 1920, more than a dozen states have restricted or outlawed it. Not federally yet, but state by state. The reasons given in hearings and newspapers sound eerily familiar now. It makes Mexicans crazed, turns them violent, leads to attacks on white women, corrupts youth. Stories circulate, almost all unverified, of men going loco after one cigarette and committing hideous crimes. The plant itself is blamed, but the real target is the people smoking it. Anti-immigrant sentiment finds a convenient scapegoat in a green leaf. Meanwhile, in New Orleans around the same years, a different threat appears. Jazz is born in the back rooms and streets of the city. Improvised, free, full of feeling. Many of the early musicians, mostly black, some Creole, smoke marijuana. They call it muggles, gauge tea, reefer. It is cheap, easy to get through dock workers and traveling bands. Louis Armstrong smokes it regularly. He keeps a tin of muggles in his trumpet case. Cab Calloway sings about it in Reefer Man. The music is loose, swinging, playful, qualities some musicians credit to the plant. In Harlem and Chicago, as jazz spreads north during the Great Migration, marijuana travels with it. Small tea pads, private apartments where people gather to smoke, appear in cities. Users are mostly musicians, artists, dock workers, a few bohemians. Again, no national panic yet, just pockets of use in creative and marginalized communities. Let your eyelids grow heavier still. Imagine a dimly lit room in 1920s New Orleans, windows shuttered against the afternoon heat, a small group sitting on mismatched chairs and floor cushions. A Victrola plays a slow blues record. Someone lights a thin hand-rolled cigarette, takes a long pull, passes it. Laughter comes soft and easy. A trumpet player closes his eyes and nods to the rhythm inside his head. No one is afraid. No one is planning a war. Just people finding a moment of lightness in a heavy world. The real shift comes in the 1930s. The Great Depression deepens fear and scapegoating. The newly formed Federal Bureau of Narcotics, led by Harry J. Anslinger, needs a mission. Alcohol prohibition has ended. The agency needs a new target. Anslinger chooses marijuana. He compiles lurid stories, many later proven false or wildly exaggerated. Circulates pamphlets claiming the drug causes insanity, murder, rape, suicide. He coins the term killer weed. He pushes for federal legislation. In 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act passes, technically a tax law, but in practice a prohibition. Possession, sale, transfer become heavily restricted and punishable. No medical exemptions remain. By 1942, cannabis is removed from the U.S. pharmacopoeia entirely. Enforcement begins immediately. Raids on tea pads, arrests of jazz musicians, deportations of Mexican workers caught with a single joint. The propaganda films of the era, Reefer Madness, 1936, originally titled Tell Your Children, show teenagers descending into madness after one puff. The plant is portrayed as a gateway to heroin, crime, racial mixing, moral collapse. The language is racialized from the start. Marijuana, the Mexican name, is used deliberately instead of cannabis, the scientific term, to associate it with foreigners and danger. And yet, use never stops. It goes underground. Soldiers returning from World War II bring stories of smoking hashish in North Africa and the Middle East. Beatniks in the 1950s, Kerouac, Ginsberg, Burroughs, experiment with it in New York and San Francisco. Folk musicians on the Greenwich Village scene pass joints in Washington Square Park. By the early 1960s, the counterculture begins to bloom. Marijuana becomes a symbol of rebellion, peace, expanded consciousness. College students, artists, civil rights activists, anti-war protesters smoke it openly, or semi-openly. The plant is no longer just medicine or immigrant habit. It is a cultural marker. Let your breathing deepen now, slow and even. Feel how far away everything has become. The room is quiet. The story is almost finished. No need to remember the dates or the loss. Just let the gentle arc settle over you. A plant that began as incense in a prehistoric tomb, traveled as sacrament and medicine across continents, became fiber and food and small comfort. Then, briefly, became a target of fear and control, only to keep growing anyway. Quietly, stubbornly, in backyards, in forests, in greenhouses, in hearts that still need a little softening at the end of a long day. In the 1970s and 1980s, the pendulum swings again. Harsh sentencing laws, the war on drugs, millions arrested, mostly for small amounts. Yet use continues to rise. Surveys show more people trying it every decade. Medical research reemerges quietly in the 1990s. Studies on THC for nausea, glaucoma, pain, epilepsy. California passes Proposition 215 in 1996, the first modern medical cannabis law. Other states follow slowly, then faster. By the 2010s and 2020s, legalization sweeps across much of the United States and Canada, parts of Europe, Latin America, Australia. Uruguay becomes the first country to fully legalize in 2013. Thailand decriminalizes in 2022. The plant returns to pharmacies, dispensaries, gardens, sometimes under strict regulation, sometimes freely. And through all of it, the bans, the propaganda, the rediscovery, the laws, the oldest story remains unchanged. Someone, somewhere, still lights a small fire or rolls a small cigarette or pours a small drink. They inhale or sip or simply sit beside the plant as it grows. And for a little while the world feels softer, time stretches, worries recede, laughter comes more easily, or silence feels deeper and kinder. That is the thread that never breaks. The fire in our imaginary hearth is down to a single ember now. The night outside is vast and calm. Your body is heavy, warm, ready. There is nothing left to do. No more words needed. Just let go. Sleep well.